I have been thinking about emergency funds so much lately, and so today we're going to talk about how much we all really need in our emergency funds, and we are going to go through 10 questions to help you think about how much you personally might need in your emergency fund. This is something I wanted to talk about today because it's something I've been personally thinking about so much in the last few months, and I actually don't love the financial advice out there around emergency funds. The traditional guidance is to have about 3 to 6 months of living expenses saved in a separate high-yield savings account, but even that has always felt a little one-size-fits-all to me. People's individual situations and circumstances are so different. I think there's so many variables that you have to factor in to decide, okay, do you need 3 months? Do you need 6 months? And the landscape has changed a lot just in the last few years because of the rise in the cost of living. So there are now financial experts like Susie Orman and Ramit Sethi who encourage people to actually work toward a 12-month emergency fund. And I feel like the financial advice and guidance around, do you need a leaner emergency fund or a bigger one, even that has been kind of vague. I've seen some people talk about things like job security. If you're in a more volatile field, then you should have a bigger emergency fund. If you are self-employed, then you should have a bigger emergency fund and things like that. But I just think there are so many other things that we can consider, and that's what we're going to get into today. And just in my own experience, I've always found it a little difficult to figure out where on that spectrum I fall. Am I someone who needs the lower end of savings? Am I someone who should be working towards that 12-month emergency fund? I don't really know. And so I decided to craft these 10 questions that we can kind of do as a little quiz together today. You will be able to tally up points as you go. And based on your point total, I have sort of like ranges recommended. I want to be super clear. This is for entertainment purposes. I am not a financial advisor. This is not financial advice. This is just a fun exercise we can do together to just give you more guidance and more things to consider when you are trying to decide, are you someone who needs a 3-month emergency fund, a 6-month emergency fund, or perhaps even greater? Now, you can answer these questions as you go. The point scoring is very simple and straightforward, but I will also put up all the questions at the end as well. So if you don't want to keep track as we go, that's totally fine. I will put the 10 questions up on the screen as well as the points so that you can just tally everything at the end. Please let me know what your score is in the comments as well and how much you currently have in your emergency savings. If this is a goal that you are working towards to try to build up your emergency fund even more, definitely let me know down below. Now, for all of these questions, except for the very last one, you will be giving yourself 1 point if you answer yes. It's only for the very last question that I changed things up a little bit. So if you answer yes to any of the next 9 questions, you get a point. So with that, let's get into the questions. Also, sorry, it's like 8 in the morning, so I'm going to be sneaking coffee in between the questions. Question number 1, do you have another income in your household? If you say yes, you get a point. If you say no, 0 points for you. Sorry, but this is also a question where I get 0 points to be fair. If you are single and that's the only income in the household, or if you are a solo income for a household, let's say you support a spouse, you support dependents, children, then no points for you on this question. But if you are in a dual income household or greater, then you get a point. And this is really just for obvious reasons. If you have multiple incomes coming in one household, there's a little bit more of a safety net. If there is a job loss or something like that, the chances that you are both going to experience job loss at the exact same time are pretty slim. And so it means that there's a little bit more of a cushion where even if you lose your income or something happens, someone gets injured, someone goes on disability, anything like that, there's just a little bit more support there for you. Question number 2, do you have a family safety net? And I think this is such a spicy one because it really gets so much into financial privilege and the fact that we are all starting in very different places and working with very different levels of privilege. But I think it's so important to factor this into your decision making, and it's not something that I ever see anyone talking about. But I think it became very clear to me as soon as I went off to university, as soon as I turned 18 and went off into the world and started being around people who were from very different financial situations than me, that I realized just how much support and how much of a safety net some people have compared to others. And I think I was reading about this in an article recently. It was about a 20-something-year-old guy working in tech, living in a big city, and he was making the argument for having a much smaller emergency fund simply just because of his family's financial position. And when I read it, it made so much sense to me. I hadn't actually really thought about it that way before, but he was like, if I lose my job, I can move back in with my parents immediately, like no questions asked. They would be able to help pay my rent for a few months if I needed that. Like they would so so easily be able to cover that, and they would so happily do that. You know, they would be able to help out with a sudden car expense or, you know, help with buying a new car. And if you are someone who is fortunate enough to be in a situation like this, and of course it's a huge spectrum, you know, you might not be in a situation quite like that, but perhaps you could move back in with family in the case of a job loss, then yeah, I think you do have a family safety net. I think you can give yourself a point on this question. And really, if you do have access to financial supports or even just like the ability to stay with family if needed, then I think that actually should be a pretty big determinant of how much you need to save in an emergency fund. So again, if you have a family safety net, 1 point for you. If you would not be able to access those kinds of resources from your family, 0 points. Question number 3, do you have a month ahead fund or sinking funds? And again, if you answer yes, then you get a point here. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, I will quickly explain what these mean. A month ahead fund is something that I think was popularized by You Need a Budget. If I'm misattributing that, please let me know in the comments, please correct me. But I think it was You Need a Budget that made this concept at least much more popularized. And what this means is that essentially you have enough of a buffer, let's say in your checking account, where you would be able to pay all of your upcoming month's expenses with money you currently have. So let's say at the start of the month, it's, you know, November 1st, you currently have enough money in your bank account to pay all of November's bills. Essentially, you're not in that cycle where you're always waiting for payday, where you're always waiting for your next paycheck to be able to pay off this debt or to be able to pay this bill. So that's what a month ahead fund is. But I also wanted to include sinking funds because this isn't something I personally do, but I know that a lot of people do this. They create sinking funds for everything. And sinking funds are really just dedicated savings buckets for specific items or goals. So some people might have a car maintenance sinking fund. Some people might have a vet bills sinking fund. Some people might have a new car sinking fund. Some people really have sinking funds for like everything. So if you have a month ahead fund where you have this buffer of like a month's worth of living expenses, or you have lots of dedicated sinking funds where you've saved for gifts, you've saved for car repairs, you've saved for vet bills, you've saved for all of these things, then I think that puts you in a much better general financial position. And you may actually not need as much in an emergency fund because you've already sort of planned for some of these unexpected things that might pop up. You already have this buffer of money. And so if you have either a month ahead fund and or sinking funds, then you can give yourself a point here. Question number 4, do you have more than one source of income? And this can be absolutely anything. It could be a side hustle. It could be consulting or contracting work that you do. It could be money that you make on social media. It could be money that you have even just coming in from interest or dividends every month. Like let's say you make $100 a month on interest in a high yield savings account. That totally counts. That is another source of income. And if you have anything like that, then you can give yourself 1 point here. And the reason for that is that even if it's a small amount of money, it still just does add a buffer. You know, in the case of something like a job loss or a big unexpected expense, it just gives you that opportunity to bring in a little bit of extra money. Like let's say you do something even like you do Rover on the side, you do a little bit of pet sitting here and there. And maybe you don't make a ton of money from it. You make $200 a month on average, let's say. But in the case of a job loss, maybe that's something you would be able to ramp up really quickly and get a lot more clients all of a sudden. And now you can scale that up to $1,000 a month. And maybe it's not enough to completely pay your bills in the case of a job loss, but every little bit helps. And what we're really just trying to do is add buffers, add, you know, lots of layers of protection into our finances. So even though $1,000 a month might not cover all your expenses, it's still better than having to go $1,000 a month into debt or having to put that money on a credit card to be able to buy groceries or pay bills. So every little bit helps. And I think the more that you have these kinds of additional sources of income, the more of a buffer you have and the less you actually need saved in an emergency fund. So if you have any additional source of income outside of your 9 to 5, outside of your day job, then you can give yourself 1 point here. Number 5, do you have disability and critical care insurance? So this should be a simple yes or no. A lot of us probably have this through our day jobs. And so if something happens like For critical care, that's, in the instance of if you get something like cancer, I think things like ALS are covered. If you are diagnosed with a pretty serious illness, then you essentially get an insurance payout. And the policies are often in the range of like $50,000 to $100,000 to help cover you for 6 months, a year, maybe longer. And it can also help with covering things like medical expenses during that time. And then short-term and long-term disability is a little bit more broad. That covers a broader range of different illnesses and things like that can come up. It can cover things like mental health leave or stress leave. So if you have disability insurance and critical illness insurance, then give yourself a point here. And again, this is really just about this idea where we were trying to add layers of protection into our finances. And this just really covers you in the instance of illness or injury. And I know that a lot of us think that something like this will never happen to us, but I personally know so many people who have gone on disability for a wide range of different things, mental health and physical health. And this is something that actually happens to a huge amount of us. I think it's about 1 in 3 people who actually end up retiring earlier than they plan to because of things like disability or illness. So having this kind of coverage can be super important. And if you don't have this kind of coverage, then it's important to make sure that you have more of a buffer in your own savings. Question number 6, do you have relative job safety? And I'm putting a lot of emphasis on the relative because I feel like the last couple years have really upended a lot of things and really made us realize how precarious all of our jobs are. But that being said, there are still a lot of fields that are much more stable than others. There are certain fields where if you lose your job, you would probably be able to find a new one very quickly, if not immediately. I think there are some government roles that are quite stable or have a lot of protections. Again, I think what we're seeing in the US this past year, you have to be careful and don't take anything for granted. But for sure, there are still some jobs that have a lot more protection, have a lot more stability than others. And so for this one, I give myself no points. I don't think I have any job stability. I work in tech. It's an extremely volatile field and there's very little protections. I can essentially get laid off or fired at any time. And there have been massive rounds of layoffs, huge cuts in the tech industry over the last few years. So now it's, not as likely that I would just be unemployed for a couple months. It's a lot more likely that I would be unemployed for 6 months or a year. But if you work in a position where you think you would be able to recover from job loss really quickly, or the chances of you experiencing job loss in the first place are quite low, of course it's never impossible, but it's quite low, then give yourself a point here. Question number 7, can your family all support themselves financially? And when I say family in this case, I'm thinking more like parents, siblings, extended family. I'm not talking about your immediate nuclear family. Like if you have a 5-year-old, can they provide for themselves? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about your parents and brothers, sisters. And again, I think this is something we don't see factored in, but different people, especially from different backgrounds, have very different levels of responsibility to their families, where for some folks, they are very much expected to send money to their family, maybe on a monthly basis or multiple times throughout the year. They know that they are going to be responsible in large part for supporting their parents' retirement. And so that's more what I'm talking about. If you have familial responsibilities financially to your parents, siblings, etc., then I think that's really something to consider in your planning. If you do have a situation where you are able to be pretty financially independent and all of your family members are also able to be fairly financially independent, your parents are retirement planning, they are making their own income that is sufficient, then you get a point here. I think this is something we just need to be honest about, and just some people are absolutely going to have these responsibilities. And so I think that just means you need to take that into account when you are planning your own emergency savings. Number 8, do you have access to strong social services? And I don't want to completely generalize here in terms of the US and Canada. I have lived in both places. And so I'm no expert on this. This is very anecdotal. I think for you, you will be able to make this decision for yourself based on what country you live in, based on what state or province you live in. But essentially, do you have access to strong social supports if something goes wrong? Like I know, for instance, in Scandinavia, there is a robust social safety net. There are so many things in place for, in cases of job loss, for single mothers, education is free, healthcare is free. So if you live somewhere like that, if you have access to this strong kind of social safety net, give yourself a point here. I think it means that you just have to rely on yourself less because you are able to rely more on the systems, on your government to help you in difficult times. But if you don't have access to that, like if you don't have access to paid maternity leave, if you don't have access to universal health care, if you don't have access to robust unemployment, if you don't have access to things like that, then no points on this one, sorry. But I think it just means you need to have your eyes wide open about the fact that if something goes wrong, it's really going to be on you. It's on you to take care of yourself and provide for yourself. And while I don't agree that that is the right thing, I think it's also important to be pragmatic if that is your situation. Like for instance, when I lived in the US, I knew that I didn't have access to anything. I don't think even as a visa holder, I was able to access something like unemployment. And I also had to think about things like if I lost my job, then I would need to get COBRA, or you need to go on the exchange for health insurance. So it's kind of this thing in the States where if something bad happens, it almost like compounds and creates all these other additional expenses or things that you need to worry about. Like if you lose your job, you lose your health insurance, and then that means you need to pay out of pocket now for COBRA or the ACA, which can be hundreds and hundreds of dollars a month for you to now pay for health insurance, even though you just lost your job. And so if that is more the situation you find yourself in, I think it's important to just be really honest with yourself about that. I know certainly now that I live in Canada, I feel a lot more at ease. I give myself a point in this category now because if I did get laid off, for instance, I would have access to decent unemployment. I would get about $2,400 a month in unemployment. We also have universal health care. So even though I would lose my private health insurance that covers things like the dentist and the chiropractor, I still, like if I break an arm, I'm fine. That's $0. Like for emergencies, for, extreme things like that, if I need to see a doctor, if I end up in an ER, that's all free. And that also provides huge peace of mind. And so because of access to things like that, it just means I think that I can, personally save a little bit less. I don't need to be as prepared with my own savings. Question number 9, can you cut back your expenses a lot if you need to? And if you can, then you can give yourself a point here. And the reason for that is quite simple. Like if something does happen, if there is a job loss or another emergency, if you know that you would be able to pretty quickly, cancel a bunch of subscriptions or cut your grocery bill down or, just cut a lot of the fat, then this just gives you a lot more flexibility. And I think I'm in a position where, I spend more than I need to. And so if something happened in my life where I really needed to tighten up the budget, I could do that. There's things I could go and cancel right away. I could go cancel subscriptions. I know that I could probably get my grocery budget down about $100 a month. Like I know that there are a bunch of things that I could do to help cut down my expenses, just to help weather the storm and get me through a difficult time. But if you are already, living on a very tight budget, you've already cut everything, then that just gives you less flexibility. And that means that you should have a little bit more saved because you're already doing the best you can. You've already cut everything out. And so just having some of those extra savings to help you weather the storm if something does happen, then having the savings will help you get through. Okay, we are coming up to the last question. So far for all of those previous ones, you should have given yourself a point if you answered yes, 0 points if you answered no. We're turning things around a little bit for this last one. This is actually where we're gonna be docking points. So if you answer yes to any of these, you actually lose a point now. I'm so sorry. So this question is really about dependents, liabilities, furry friends. Essentially, this is the how many responsibilities do you have in your life question. Do you own a home? Do you own a car? Do you own a pet? And do you have any children? And for each one of those that you answer yes to, dock yourself 1 point. So if you have a car and a pet, you're losing 2 points. If you have kids and a home and a car, you're losing 3 points. I'm so sorry. But yeah, I think this is such an important consideration. Having these kinds of bigger responsibilities, i.e. other living beings that you are responsible for, or just big line items, some of the biggest purchases you're gonna make in your life, a car, a house, and cars are depreciating assets. They are liabilities. And so if you have obligations like this in your life, the chances that you are going to need a car repair or a home repair, or that your kids are going to need something, or that your dog is going to end up in the vet for, emergency surgery. There's just so much more unexpected things that can come up. And we love our kids and our pets, of course. It just means that we need to be more financially prepared. And so now you should be at a point where you can tally up a total, and I will put all of the questions on the screen again one more time. You can feel free to pause, tally up, come up with your total number after adding up and subtracting everything for all of the 10 questions. Let me know in the comments what your final score is, and then I will break down how I'm interpreting the scores and what this all means for how much we should think about having in our emergency funds. Okay, so if you ended up with a total of 7 to 9 points, I think having a leaner emergency fund could totally make sense. Maybe you want to go on the lower side of a 3-month emergency fund. Really, if you are someone in this situation, you are probably younger, like maybe you're in your 20s, you're single, you don't have any pets, you live in a city, so you don't have a car, you don't own a home yet, you probably have some support from parents still. If you are in that situation, yeah, I think having a smaller emergency fund can make a lot of sense. Now, if you ended up with 5 to 6 points, I think having a little bit more of like the 4 to 6 months of savings makes a lot of sense. It probably just means that you have, some more responsibilities. Then if you had a total of 3 to 4 points, I think having somewhere like a 6 to 8 month emergency fund makes sense. This probably means that you work in a more volatile industry, that you don't have access to as many, safety nets either through the government or through your family. You're a little bit more on your own. Maybe you're the only income in your household. And so you're just at higher risk. And if something happens, having that buffer of 6 to 8 months will really help you weather a lot more. And then if you ended up with 2 points or less, I think considering having an 8-month emergency fund or more, maybe in the 8 to 12 month emergency fund, I think that would be something that's super valuable to work towards. Of course, that's not something that's going to happen overnight. I know for me that I have been working on building my emergency fund since 2017, and I still don't have a 6-month emergency fund because life has happened. I have had to draw down from those savings multiple different times over the last 8 years. And so you make progress, and then you have to take money out, and then you're putting money back in. And that's the way it goes. And, a lot of us might only be able to save $20 a month or $50 a month, $100 a month towards our emergency fund. And so progress can be really slow, but I just think it's a valuable goal to work towards slowly. And it might take you years, that's totally fine. But if you are in a situation where you are a little bit more financially precarious, you have job volatility, maybe you're the only income in your house, maybe you have a lot of responsibilities like a house, a car, children, and you don't have that much of a safety net, then working towards having an 8+ month emergency fund, I think can be a really good goal. I think in a situation like that, it's worth the opportunity cost of not investing that money. And I think that's really ultimately how we all need to think about it. Like, is it worth it to have the money sitting in cash in a bank account, not invested? And I think for people who just have more risk because of all of these questions we talked about, it really can be worth the opportunity cost. It really can be worth it just to help you sleep at night and to know that if and when something goes wrong, because something will go wrong, that's life. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. When something goes wrong, you will be prepared. And in those situations, money is the last thing you want to have to worry about. So I hope this helped. I hope it gave you some other things to think about when deciding how big your emergency fund should be. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Let me know what you scored. If you're working towards building your emergency fund, let me know down below. I would love to hear all about it. And if you need something else to watch, you can go ahead and watch this video where I talk about why I've decided to start contributing to my emergency fund again. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.